And just like that, we're recording.
Clap sync?
Those are the days of yesteryear.
Yesteryear, indeed.
Mm-hmm.
The need is gone as we are all here together.
In studio once more. It's the first time in a hot minute we have had
First time
consecutive...
since La La Land in what, May?
Yes.
May.
But this is the first time in a hot minute we've had consecutive episodes where we're recording in the same place all together.
Consecutive? I mean, yeah, they are like sequentially.
Strictly speaking, they are consecutive.
Strictly speaking.
Consecutive, not immediate.
Right. It's like
just gonna tweak
usually an immediacy to consecutive that is implied.
See, I
It's when it's typically
I
used.
disagree. I don't think that's part of the connotation.
Because they're occurring in sequence. The
They are, I
frequency
suppose.
of the sequence.
I suppose, yeah, the frequency slowed down, but the sequence remains.
So, yeah, I think we can say consecutive because if somebody looking back through our playlists, our feed, if we can get the RSS feed working properly,
It works.
it does. Okay,
Yeah, I fixed it.
good.
I think. I guess I don't have any data to test it
because
we haven't released
in
a new episode. But.
The immediate previous hiatus before this last hiatus, something happened that we had to fix to get the episode up and working.
And it's been so long, I can't remember what that was. So,
Well, as long as it still works now, that's all that matters. But yes, it feels good to be back in the podcasting mode once more. Because it's been a summer. Lots has happened this summer.
Oh, yeah.
lots and lots has happened.
Where to begin?
Yeah, James, you can start.
Yeah, I can start.
Let's go around the room. Let's share.
So since May, when we last recorded, I think we had just moved into this apartment
Yep, pretty much.
when we last recorded, and we acknowledged it thusly. I have done some stuff. I did some softball league. I did some flag football. I started a new job. I went on a big family trip to South Dakota with the entire family and got miserably allergic to whatever it is in South Dakota and had an interesting 8-hour drive.
You're
back
allergic
Fargo.
to South Dakota.
I'm allergic to to
To be
South
fair,
Dakota.
that's a reasonable thing to be allergic to.
Yes.
Of all of the things to be allergic to, South Dakota, it's one of them.
Yeah,
It's
North
up there with
Dakota,
Wisconsin.
Best Dakota. That's all I'm saying.
That's what this is where North Dakota stands here.
Well, we
But yeah.
currently stand in North Dakota. So.
But yeah, I guess
we currently sit in North Dakota.
true.
True. Maybe we should get a standing desk. What if we podcast without a standing desk?
I mean, there's like some radio shows where like one of the hosts will have like a standing desk or whatever, or like a DJ for like a radio station or what have you. But yeah, I suppose the biggest change for me was getting a new job. So I'm still doing marketing, just a different company. I'm no longer in the Catholic school to former Catholic industrial complex. Okay, that's too mean, but yeah, that's so we're doing good. I'm liking the it so far. I went and it has to do with agriculture. So I was out shooting cows in the western half of North Dakota with a camera, if you must know. They are not yet to be made into hamburgers, but that will come for them all at some point or another.
Hamburgers come for us all.
So by the time you guys see the footage I shot while I was out there, you might be eating it. Or the subjects.
You might be eating the
The
footage.
footage.
Yeah.
I'm going to march to Silicon Valley and find that one
Server farm.
Amazon warehouse. Do you
Server
guys know
farm.
if you use AWS or Azure? I suppose since you're using .NET, you're probably
we
using
use
Azure.
OneDrive. So whatever
You do not store all your files in cloud hosting on OneDrive.
we
it would be Azure.
do.
It would be
and
Azure.
SharePoint.
It's Azure then.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyway.
So he's going to show up in Redmond, Washington, and find a particular rail car full of spinning silicon drives and eat one of them.
Yep.
It's more difficult to eat footage these days.
Yep.
It's really
Ever
a lot
since
more
the
difficult.
change to digital, like back in the day, you could just open up a can and find a reel, and just
You could go to
If it's-
town.
go to town on
If
that
it's not
sucker.
food, then how come it's on a server farm?
Do, 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 do. Does it grow on a farm?
Is it full of bees? That
Is
I
it
suppose
made of Jim?
that bit has happened between now and the last podcast.
Did it? Was
Yes,
it?
Yeah,
that was the summer at
Ben's,
Ben's.
Ben's
Sure
camping.
does.
Sure
It
does.
does.
Yep, that too.
That's also
Although it won't be news to likely
like
any
the
of
two
our,
people that listen.
Yeah, the two listeners.
Although I do need to thank you for reminding me by having a podcast. I need to
Nathan,
drop this in the Bible study.
Yeah,
I got a new Bible study. I got picked up at a bar.
yeah. Just go ahead and go over your summer, Nathan, because you had some cool stuff happen
It was
since the last episode.
general things that happened. It was fairly standard. The reunions, the cousins weekend. It was good. The typical things. Atypical things. We got a new Bible study, so that was pretty cool. Hello to the Bible study. If you're listening to this,
You know
after I
who you
drop
are.
this into the group chat that's in, what is it we use? GroupMe? No,
Telegram.
WhatsApp.
Telegram. Are these people Orthodox by any chance?
Not that I'm aware of. But no, I also made a couple videos that blew up. I don't know if I'm gonna link the channel to our doings online here specifically, just because what I plan to do
There's a
is
Zelda
very
map
separate.
theory video. Odds are, if you search it, it'll show up.
Just look up Zelda map theory. It should be the first two videos that pop up, and I'm very proud of it.
Yeah.
Third one I'm working on. It's kind of a curveball. I'm like, okay, I made two videos about Zelda. Let's see if they'll stick around when it is very not Zelda and very not map theory.
Because
And more character analysis of an indie game from 2004 that I like.
and this was an idea for a map theory video you had basic
Honestly,
for
most
years.
of the videos I have on the list of things I want to make have been ideas or discussions I've wanted to have, but no one has been willing to have them, and I haven't had an outlet for them.
Nobody
because-
besides me.
Right. And so you've heard most of what I have videos about.
There was very
Sorry
little.
about that.
Yeah, there was very little new in the videos for me, but I still watched them for the sake of getting watch
Pumping up
minutes.
those numbers.
pumping up those
not that they need
numbers.
pumping up.
I mean, the
They're
presentation
actually
was
pretty
good and entertaining, worth watching.
Thank you.
So-
That's a pretty cool thing.
Little plug
So
there
that's
for
the thing I'm
Nathan's
doing.
other work that he's done this summer.
Yes. Other than
Good
that,
stuff.
it was all the stuff played.
You guys played a wedding.
We did play
This
a wedding.
summer.
That was actually really good. We played it at the Air Museum here.
Yep.
And that was kind of a neat venue. For one thing, when you have a 4-year-old
Yep.
who is part of the family but not part of the band
Yep.
that you need to keep occupied, an air museum with a lot of cool airplanes,
Is a
two
great
of
way
which
to do
have
that.
cockpits you're allowed to sit in,
Yep.
was very helpful.
Yes.
I got a lot of Godfather time with that kid, sitting in the cockpit of an elevator, transforming it into submarine form to get the bad guys or whatever. he
Yep.
wanted. It was constantly like, hey, Captain, what are we up to now? Let your imagination drive because I've got to listen to what song's coming on.
Yep.
So I know whether or not I need to do harmonies.
Yep.
And I even skipped out on a couple
You give him a
harmonies
little
because
bongo.
my part's not that big, relatively speaking. He needs to be occupied.
Yep. And he had like a little bongo he could play in the background there.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not a bongo, it's a djembe.
Oh, it's a djembe. Okay.
There's a difference.
Gotcha. Is one more sort of you can hold it on your lap, and the other one's like a big.
I think it's about shape. There's also difference in timbre and just how it's constructed.
Because I suppose bongos are more convex, whereas in their tubular.
like bongos are like little barrel drums, whereas you've got kind of a funnel shape vaguely. So
Yep.
it's got a wider bottom.
Cylindrical bore versus conical.
Yeah.
Exactly.
For us, wind player.
So that's kind of the difference. Also, probably regional difference, djembe. I don't know where its
Yeah.
place of origin is.
Something African.
Probably. So yeah, that was very good. I don't know if it's like my over the Lessart reunion, my dad's side. We learned that my younger sister Rachel and her husband are getting a
yes.
second child.
There will be another niece.
Not not determined yet. Next weekend
Or nephew, yeah, I suppose.
It's too early to know.
Yep.
I think she might know
Well,
by this point.
given the previous data, that must be the only conclusion.
Yeah.
There are only nieces.
There are
I've
only
I've
nieces
hereby
continue to
jinxed
be-
it.
between the 3 that I already have, those are the only second generation of my family that exist or can exist.
Right now, I'm sitting dead even at 3 nieces and 3 nephews, so we'll see what
I've got to
happens.
catch up. I've got you tied for nieces.
True, on the niece
Because
front.
2 are mutual. Mm-hmm. I need to start catching up on nephews. I need to pump up my nephew numbers.
Yep. Those are
Not
rookie numbers.
personally. That's somebody else's job.
Well, it wouldn't be a nephew then.
Anyway. Riley, what have you been up to?
Yeah, Riley, what's new with you?
Riley has big things as well.
Yes, quite.
I have discerned out of the seminary as of the end of the summer here. So, yeah, been about a month, and it's a strange, wonky time in my life. Kind of, for lack of a better term, real life. It's not real life because seminary is also real life.
Right.
In some ways,
in many
more
ways,
real.
more precisely,
I suppose you could say more ordinary life.
The lay life.
less typical.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're out here and still figuring out what I'm going to do with life because I gave my full heart and soul to pursuing priesthood for the last
3
3
years.
plus years of my life and haven't seriously thought about anything else. And so
And this is the part where the
this is the part
serious
where I
thinking
started
happens.
seriously thinking about anything else. So
There it is.
for the time being, I'm planning to go back to software engineering, which I did before I entered, and we'll see if that pans out. It may be difficult given my 3-year hiatus
Yeah.
to find employment. I applied at the company that James works for
Yes.
now and didn't get it.
Alas.
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 Which is life.
But it was worth a shot.
It was. And I was vastly underqualified for what they wanted. So
Yeah,
I'm
there
totally,
is that.
totally understand.
Have you reached out to your previous employer?
Not yet, but I'm probably going to. They don't have any openings right now.
Ah, there's
I
that.
did reach out to Colton, and they just
Oh, it already.
reposted a new thing.
Or
about
the
me.
company that shall not. Whatever. It's too late.
Everybody has it. Just you can cut it out if you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So hopefully that will be a lead that will pan out because I do meet the criteria for that one.
So, in a strange way, in a very short amount of time, relatively speaking, we could find ourselves basically back where we started when we started the podcast, and that we could be renting a house. Riley will be working in software.
James will not be working at Catholic schools.
That's true.
I will not be
Being-
in college like I
but
was
you'll
when
still
we
be
started.
working at the airport.
Well,
Unless,
I'll see what I can do.
yeah, we'll see what the good
I mean,
Lord
I have
provides.
cashed my first YouTube check.
Ooh,
Like $250 plus.
that's more than
change.
I've ever made on YouTube, which is nothing.
And it's funny, I qualified for monetization with a single video that just
Yeah.
blew up like right before my birthday weekend, and I'm like, "Happy birthday!"
Yeah, that was pretty neat.
But nah.
But yeah, so you're gonna be I'm gonna be a slightly more committal in my when you'll next hear back from us because we have no reason to not continue recording regularly now as things currently
We just
stand.
need to decide what we talk.
Editing future James here. For whatever reason, the podcast audio didn't work on a couple of instances, including the intro. So I guess consider this your intro. We are the Palladium Papists. I'm James. And back to the regular audio in 3, 2, 1.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Riley.
I was concerned we forgot who we are.
Yeah. Have we lost our way?
I don't know who you are anymore.
Yeah, so let's see.
getting a
We're back
little-
into philosophical,
Yeah.
and this will be indeed philosophical. We are covering a hidden life.
In a world where one man will decide whether to pull a lever and kill one man, or not pull a lever and allow 5 people to die, find out in Philosophical.
It was directed by, what's his name?
Terrence Malick.
Terrence Malick. So,
Philosophical, the part of the show where we get philosophical about films.
and oh boy, this one is
Oh boy.
quite a doozy.
It doos.
So, who'd like to kick things off?
Well, probably the person who's
seen the movie twice
Twice.
and recommended it to the group.
There it is.
So, A Hidden Life is a movie about one Franz Jägerstätter.
Thought you were done with me, huh? Future James again. The intro didn't work. So the movie is about Franz Jägerstätter, and he and his family are in a farm in the Alps where they are trying to live their lives, but then Nazi Germany gets involved with the war, and Franz gets called to the war. And now back to Riley's much better synopsis.
Franz is kind of drafted into the Austrian army, goes through some training, and France, of course, immediately surrenders. And they're like, well, you're a farmer, you provide food for people, so we're going to dismiss you. So he heads back home and continues his farming life. And much of the early portion of the film is just kind of a slice of life thing with him and his family, and kind of giving us a privileged look into this hidden life of theirs.
It's very much filmed in such a way to make the viewer feel as if you're just kind of following them around their farm, watching them do things. Like, it's a very naturalistic, up close and personal kind of
It's
filming.
like someone was there with a camcorder.
It's almost like almost like documentary
Right,
style.
it has this, we'll get into this more, but
Yeah,
it has
yeah.
this kind of like, very home film kind of vibe. It's like, they don't have the cameras on stabilizers.
Yeah.
Like, it just feels like someone's walking around.
The
with
cuts are kind of awkward.
Yeah.
The voices aren't
framing.
always in focus. It's kind of
It's very interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so we see a picture of a husband and wife who are deeply devoted to one another, and they're very tender and affectionate, but they're also very holy. They pray, they pray the Angelus as they're working out in the fields. They just show you these little snippets of kind of their life and how their faith is integrated into it, and kind of suffuses it. And Franz is also kind of, he's the bell ringer. He's the guy who goes and rings the bell so that people know when mass is happening or when the Angelus is to be prayed and all that. So, like, he's involved in the life of the parish and
The community is
right.
Things were not always that way for him, though.
No, you don't get to hear much about it, but various dialogue reveals that he was a bit of a rascal in his youth, and we also learn that his father passed away in World War I in the trenches, and his mom lives in that village with him as well. It's not super clear, but kind of the take I get is that he's an outsider to the village, like he's not a native of the place. Kind of the scenes of him riding in on his motorcycle,
Yeah.
kind of
And his wife, what was her name?
Fanny,
Fani.
which is a nickname for Franziska.
Yep.
So they kind of have the same name.
It's just funny because that's the case for my my cousin and her husband. He's Francis, she's Frances. So it's sort of a similar, like,
precisely the
Germanized.
same thing. Like
Yeah.
Francis, like Franz is based on Francis.
Mhm.
So
It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she was sort of swept off her feet by him when they met. He rode in on his motorcycle, but she kind of tamed him and brought him, I guess, back into the faith, or like made him take his faith seriously.
yeah, I'd say again that's one of those things that's kind of hidden from us. It's not exactly
implied.
clear, right?
Because there's a lot of dialogue where, like, Franz's mom is talking to his wife, and she's like, "Oh, you changed him. He was different before he met you, right?" So it's kind of that thing where it's like, yeah, they met each other and transformed each other because that's how love
human
and marriage
encounter
happens.
works.
Yeah.
And the war continues, and kind of into the middle part of the war, things start to get worse, and they draft him again, and this time there's an oath of loyalty to Hitler that's part of the process. And
Because Austria had been annexed by Nazi Germany just prior to World War II. So the oath of loyalty to Hitler was required of Austrian soldiers to ensure that they would serve Germany unquestioningly, because of, loyalties could be considered not necessarily guaranteed given how they have a separate national identity from Germany proper. So that's kind of the background there. Kind of think same deals like Sound of Music. The dad in that scenario is like very much the same thing. He didn't like Austria had been absorbed by Germany, and he was still like a patriotic Austrian. In this case, it's less that and more of a
conscientious objection. In
yeah,
this case.
because in the interim between his previous military service and the later in the film, he is sort of wrestling with the idea of Hitler and the things he's hearing about the things that the Nazi regime are doing. He becomes convinced, as we know now with hindsight, that Hitler is a very evil man, does very evil things.
Right. And so when he's brought into kind of his draft sign-up day back at ends, he's asked to, he doesn't do the Heil, he doesn't do the salute, and he kind of gets taken into custody and questioned about it, and he's like, no, I'm not going to do it. I will not, make any indication of support for Hitler. I will not swear loyalty to him. I won't do any of that. And so he's imprisoned immediately for insubordination and, just pretty severely treated for his lack of willingness to
cooperate.
What the authorities perceive as treason.
Right. And many of his fellow villagers in the interim, he's refusing to support soldiers who are coming around trying to take a collection and all these sorts of things. And so he and his family are gradually...
He also refused any sort of veterans benefits from his
Correct.
prior military service.
So he's becoming increasingly alienated from his community, and his family is as well.
By extension, yeah.
Right. And
Like dirty looks in the town square,
it
authority
affects his wife
figures.
and his kids, and he feels bad about it affecting them, but also he can't, support the Nazism.
And you definitely get the sense that it puts a strain on him and his wife's relationship, but then she still nonetheless supports him because she loves him over all that.
And they try to figure out, they consider, taking a different approach and trying to hide him in the woods. But he's like, no, I have to do this. He's convinced that, showing up and being an objector is what he needs to do. And obviously this is heart-wrenching for his wife, and his kids aren't really led into it just yet because
They're
be
pretty-
very crushing
they're 6 or
things.
7.
Yeah.
They're quite young, yeah.
So, yeah, she kind of has to bear the load of all that.
With her sister and his mom,
Correct.
but also his sister and
Neither of whom are exceptionally understanding because Fanny's sister was never married and is kind of bitter about the fact that Fanny's letting her husband go. She's like, you don't appreciate what you have.
Yeah.
She's kind of jealous and bitter because she doesn't have a husband of her own. And, of course, Franz's mother is understandably reticent to let him go because
He's
she
all
lost
she
her
has
husband in war, and she's about to lose her son in war, and
it's his wife's fault. She
didn't oppose him. So,
And they had tried some workarounds, and Franz, he talks to the parish priest and he talks to the bishop, trying to figure out, like,
What do I do in this scenario?
yeah,
What is the moral thing that aligns with our faith?
because
And-
he takes the concept of an oath very seriously. Because like some people are like, oh, you can just like say the oath but not really mean it. But he's like, no, a man's word is like you're making an act of the will to say this thing if you make that oath. Like, and he can't in good conscience make an oath to somebody he believes to be diabolically evil. And so that's sort of like nobody like besides his wife really fully understands that conviction of his.
and so he's, imprisoned and treated poorly by the guards, and now kind of they purposefully try to keep the inmates separate and kind of emotionally isolated, and so, but Franz does his best to try to break that and to build some kind of community and relationship among his fellow prisoners.
Because it seems like, yeah, there are like a variety of like political prisoners and so forth in this
People in
place.
scenarios much like him.
Yep.
And you've got this classic Sprechen verboten on the wall. Speaking is forbidden.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, they're discouraging contact and community among the inmates. And so Franz is, he's a Christian man. He's generous. He gives what little he has to a man who's very obviously hungry, and like, of course, they all get the same amount of food,
Mm-hmm.
But he's
For
a
that
man
generosity,
a
he's
man of
like
charity
punished.
and desires the good of others, and is willing to sacrifice to achieve that. And there's a couple of interesting characters in the jail. There's that one kind of tempter in the desert, as it were, kind of that guy who's just like
Lost all hope and all faith in God, and sort of mocks him for maintaining his
Right.
faith and hope.
And then you have the cheerful fellow whom he knew in his time in his previous military service, who is a little bit, wishy-washy and simple, but like has a good heart and is a joyful man, and kind of does his best to look at things on the bright side, even in such dire circumstances.
And his friendship with Franz like sort of uplifts his spirits, like, and they mutually support one another, I suppose.
And Franz is tried for his alleged crime of treason and functionally makes no effort to defend himself. Has a very,
He's a
Pontius
lawyer.
Pilate kind of vibe to the trial there.
Mute as the lamb before the slaughter. And then it even has like a little aside with the guy leading the tribunal who challenges him.
And says a lot of the things that his lawyers and other
even
people
his,
have ever said.
He's like,
neighbors
look, you don't
in the
have to
village.
fight. You can be like an orderly in a hospital or something. Like, just sign this paper.
Do you
and
think
get
that
it
what
over
you're
with.
doing is going to change anything?
Yeah, because
Do you
Germany,
expect anyone to remember you?
particularly Nazi Germany, no free speech, no really right to protest or do anything like this. And yeah, like, it's not as if like his witness, all the more so that like their desire to sort of silence him and put him out to avoid any manner of influence on others.
So ultimately, what is the point? Right? That's the question they're posing to him.
And to somebody who doesn't have faith in God or belief in the afterlife or consequences for our actions here on earth, it does seem rather pointless. And that's what sort of that tempter character, his purpose he serves is just like, if you don't believe in God, then, what is the point of suffering for no reason? Why can't your convictions be malleable to suit your needs?
But ultimately, nobody changes his will, and he is found guilty by this tribunal and sentenced to death.
And his wife and the parish priest sort of come to his cell and try to talk to him one last time, but Franny sort of, she tells him, no matter what you choose, no matter what you do, no matter what happens, I will support you. So she surrenders him as almost like in a Marian way.
Yeah.
Surrenders her beloved to his death and sacrifice for the sake of the good. And sort of makes her goodbye to him basically as they're separated. And she goes home to raise the family on her own, try to pick up the pieces of their life, and never see her husband again.
Although as news reaches the town about his execution, they do start to come together more in support of this.
Because to this point, she's been very much ostracized.
Oh, yes.
And maltreated by, like
all through his time in prison, she was in a prison of her own.
yeah, getting the evil eye or down to like people like, because there's like communal like fields and harvesting and activities going on around agriculture and so forth that she's been sort of squeezed out of over the course of time because of the rest of the village is very much supportive of the war and the government, and it's like it's your duty, it's honorable to serve in the military. Why do you have to be so different?
But at the end of the film, there's more of a grieving with her and trying to, well,
Even if they don't
support the
completely
widow,
understand,
which
yeah.
is what the communities do, you know?
Yep. And now somebody else comes out to ring the bell at church.
Mm-hmm.
And that's more or less the end of the film.
Yeah.
You sort of hear like a final message from Franz to his family.
Well, that's a funny thing about the framing of the entire film. There's a lot of just correspondence that's narrated over the footage.
Which is a very Terrence Malick thing. Like, that's one of his characteristic elements of his style, is that kind of voiceover.
What other, like, because the name is familiar to me, what other films has he done that I would know?
Tree of Life is probably his most well-known
Okay.
film.
Gotcha.
It's kind of his magnum opus. Mostly other stuff he did was in like the 70s, 80s.
Oh, sure.
I see.
He's like 90 or something.
Oh, dang.
Oh.
He was born in 43, so he's not quite 90, but yeah, he's fairly old.
Getting there,
as
yeah.
filmmakers go. So yeah, he's
So
like
this
80.
is a guy from that time making a movie about that time.
Born in that time.
Born
anyway.
Born in that time, yeah.
Yeah, he's American, but notwithstanding, like, that's very much part of the life and the cultural memory of, you know,
Of
a
his
boy growing up
generation,
in his age.
And I guess we mentioned this is a true story.
Yes,
Yeah.
based upon a true story.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's embellishment and
And artistic license, but
correct, but
Like
overall the story
the
is...
bullet points of what this guy did happened.
right.
Mhm.
And this man is also a blessed in the Catholic Church.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So
Basically a martyr.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I guess,
I guess this is about the cool stuff.
the cool
part.
stuff in the film, yeah.
Yeah.
Overall, probably one of the most generous, maybe not generous, but like one of the more understanding portrayals of
Occupied Austria and
no
just like a people of faith.
people of faith, yeah. It really sort of gets to, because there's moments in the film where Franz and Franny are like wrestling with, you know, like in scripture, Lord, you said, like, you know, asking you shall receive, seeking you shall find, you know, like, how come we're still facing this suffering and stuff, but still remaining steadfast in spite of it, even though to earthly eyes it might seem as if like they're, you know, there's no reward for their
And
actions.
they're in fact being abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
But one of my favorite scenes in the film is it's almost a fourth wall, not quite a fourth wall, but like Fanny is speaking to the camera, kind of like it's a prayer. You know, they could have staged this shot so many other ways, but it's just like a straight on, you know, like she's looking right at the camera, like, you know, speaking to the Lord in prayer, and it just like, it melted me the first time. It's like, what a beautiful faith.
Yeah.
And just it's such a beautiful way of framing that faith in film.
It's a very raw, very honest prayer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
And
she just kind of like awkwardly backs away and just kind of like looks back and kind of carries on with her. Just that whole sequence was so.
it's very sincere, very sort of intimate, you know,
It's like,
between
and that's
her
kind
and
of
God.
how the whole film is. It's just like very raw and real and genuine. It doesn't shove away the suffering. It embraces the suffering, but also meets it with faith. And
There's
the
no real
promises of
grand
God.
narrative. It's just simply showing you their life
Right.
in a very naturalistic way. I appreciated how, especially around World War II and other historical films, where they do weird color grading and things to make it look like it's a black and white photo, but it's like, dang it, I want to know what it looked like back then. Quit like throwing all this sunglasses over like quit putting the Mexico filter on things. I want to see what it looked like. And this movie is very much shot in a very naturalistic, almost documentary style
was it shot? It was shot on location
in Austria, yeah,
correct?
and
Because
up in the Alps.
there was a lot of lovely scenery,
There's-
and it just cut to it. At
Yeah,
all
it's
opportunities.
very beautiful, very beautiful,
Yep.
and just the way they live life in the Alps, and, you know, the farm community carrying on as they have for generations, and you're like sort of vaguely aware there's a war going on, but like in in that part of the world, it never really reached, the mountains of Austria. So they're sort of insulated from it, but affected very deeply by it all the same, in a very personal manner. So that's very well, just very well shot. And it's interesting, like the camera angles they choose and stuff. Like sometimes they're not like, like objectively the composition isn't great, but
They're
that serves a
almost
purpose.
never
Yeah.
composed in a typical rule of thirds kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
And the shots
Very
are
intentionally.
very much like kind of under the chin, like just getting you up in people's faces, and it's just very kind of strange and
And somebody who has filmed in candidly in environments, mostly weddings, but like where you're just sort of sneaking around and getting shots of people as they are, in a situation. It's like almost like you're holding, because the way I do it, at least, is I sort of hold the camera down. So it's like less noticeable, because if you have it up to your face, then people notice you. And I'm kind of a tall guy, so it's very easy to see the camera just like poking at you. But it's shot very much in a way where you're just sort of like hiding the fact you're holding a camera and just sort of sneaking shots of people just living their everyday life in a very inconspicuous way. It's very much shot that way.
It's like the camera itself is an unseen character throughout the entire film.
Yeah.
Like, it's either a representative for you standing in on this piece of history, observing this hidden life, or the presence of God and the Holy Spirit, or their guardian angel, or something, just like some extra presence that no one is explicitly aware of that is observing all of this and seeing it, because there ultimately is a point. It's not truly hidden.
I like how, like what you said about the, like almost as like God or the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit, God, same thing.
Yeah.
But like watching over the whole thing silently, because that's sort of what the film wrestles with, is like God silently watching the suffering of the faithful.
And when you point out her direct fourth wall break to the camera in her prayer, it's like, oh, that thing in the back of my mind is like, that's slightly more validated. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
But it's like,
but even though the suffering may seem to be meaningless or unseen or unacknowledged, the very fact that it's being observed, like God is bearing witness to it, and like sees all things, and will, your reward will be great in heaven. That sort of an idea is very,
your Father who sees what is hidden,
yes,
will reward you.
Because that's sort of it's a recurring theme in the movie. It's like, nobody's going to know. This is just going to happen, and it'll pass away, and you'll be gone, and nobody will remember you. But the fact that we're watching this movie,
the fact that he's beatified,
says otherwise.
Many people know his name. Many people ask for his intercession. Many people have heard his story.
His entire village remembers him in the ringing of the bell at the end.
Yeah, so it's a quite a powerful witness to that. And I think at some level, we might not be facing down a fascistic regime with a despotic leader, but like we've all experienced to some degree that sort of silent suffering in whatever way, where we just feel like, what we're doing doesn't seem to matter in the grand scheme of things. Like, why should we suffer for this? But I feel like in some small way, like each of us has sort of had that experience, and this is a much more profound expression of that part of the human
exposition of it.
Yeah.
I also kind of think it's interesting. We get to pull back the curtain and see what it was like in Austria for the people, for the church, for the people involved.
Yeah.
And hearing the church, like him bring his plea to the father, to the priest, and to the bishop.
Their hands are very tied.
Their hands are very tied, like politically and socially, but also you can tell they agree with him, but don't know how to proceed themselves in a way that wouldn't compromise the role of the church in the community. And so it's
because the church wasn't exactly well regarded by the Nazis.
They mentioned at one
barely
point in the film that
tolerated.
a bunch of priests are getting sent to concentration camps. Like, of course, we know Maximilian Kolbe and many others, I'm sure.
Yep.
But it's you get that perspective, and it's like it's not neither praising nor condemning them. It's like that's the reality,
the environment in which he has to make his decision.
Yeah, and he even Franz even brings it up to the head of the tribunal, where it's like, are you comfortable with everything you've done? Are you doing this because you're afraid of something? Or are you doing this because you believe in it? And the head of the tribunal, like after Franz is carried off to the other chamber, he has a moment where he sits down in Franz's chair that he was interviewing him in, with the same framing and in kind of a similar pose, even considering his own place in all of this. And will people remember his name? What role did he play in history? Is he doing anything that'll change anything? And had him considering his own place. He ultimately came to the decision he did to condemn him because of his position and his fears and all the things going on with him. But you got that window into maybe he wasn't as secure in his position or as like evil as another,
because he's a pretty
film might
old
have.
man. Like, it's implied that his military service predates the Nazi regime.
Right. And he was taken to Berlin, right? So it would have been
Yeah,
German.
is
It
in
would have been
Germany.
German.
Yeah, yep.
So it wouldn't have been like
Another Austrian.
the
no.
Austrian perspective, but still.
This guy is like implied to be a lifelong army guy who was probably in the First World War.
Right, under different regimes, under different circumstances. So it was kind of interesting to get that humanizing factor to everyone else in the area, because it's just everyone fighting their own hidden battles.
And there was something you said, Riley, about the motif of the wedding ring.
Yeah, I
the other
noticed
day
that
when we
more
were watching
clearly
it.
the second watch.
And that head of the tribunal had his own wedding ring, it very clearly. So it's like everybody's got people they care about in this.
Everyone has a family they seek to love and protect, and everything they do has ramifications on all that. And Franz knows that very well, and
He doesn't want to leave his children fatherless and his wife to care for them on her own.
And yet he doesn't want to be.
he can't deny his conscience. He can't consciously and knowingly say no to what the Lord desires for him.
Yeah.
It's like this overwhelming feeling he has that what he must do, which, when you've developed a prayer life and you sort of are trying to discern the will of God in your life, it's seldom like a voice calling to you from the heavens and directing you to do something specific, but rather a deep, abiding conviction that God places in your heart that motivates you. And this film does a really good job of like showing that. And that's how Franz describes it. But he feels like, it was never really a choice whether to do this or not. It was like,
Do I have a right not to?
yep. Yeah. So, any other cool things, I guess, before we get into the transcendence stuff?
Nothing.
The soundtrack is very. Oh, this is going to be.
Soundtrack can be. We can talk
Yeah,
about
well,
that
yeah, we'll get there.
in beauty, but
Truth. What truths can we find in A Hidden Life?
it does a fantastic job of demonstrating the primacy of conscience in the Christian life. Like,
Gain the world and lose your soul, or lose your life for the Lord's sake.
I
Say
think
that.
it would be a morally acceptable decision to do as the priest and the bishop recommended. Like, you, for the sake of your family, choose to
under circumstances
comply.
outside of your control.
Right. Like, you wouldn't have been able to condemn Franz for doing it.
Right.
But his conscience spoke powerfully, and he listened and he obeyed, and that's what conscience is for. It's the faculty for us to discern, in part, the will of God, but also to discern our own principles, and
Because if it
adhere
wasn't,
to-
if it was simply like him, like his ego or whatever, he wouldn't have endured the sufferings and trials that he did. So that sort of bears witness to the depth of his conviction.
And ultimately, his witness was important. His suffering was not for naught. It bought his salvation and likely the salvation of many others. And also, it's an example to follow. It's not the only example. Everyone's going to be called differently, but like his conviction, his conscience, his following of the Lord's will for him, we should emulate following his will like that steadily and steadfast.
Yeah. And also, the story is a very beautiful portrayal of what it means to have the complementarity of marriage, and what it means for a wife to subordinate herself to her husband,
but also what it means for a man to love
his wife as Christ loved the church.
Exactly. It is like a very, very accurate portrayal of that, because they have a very complementary relationship. They're very...
We're not talking about 1950s America. Like, they're both working every day. They're both...
She's doing her work on the farm while he's off at the war.
Caring for the kids, tending the farm.
And they both do childcare. They both love their daughters and are very much involved in their lives and actively, play with them and work with them.
Passionately in love with one another, but also very frank and honest with each other, and
it is entirely cooperative, but also complementary.
And like we mentioned earlier, the most full expression of that is when she tells him, no matter what you choose, I will support you, I will love you. As he is basically facing death, she's there standing with him.
Toward the end, I could not help but see the parallels to the Passion and Mary and Christ's roles in that.
Yeah,
because you had him bearing the brunt of the burden, and
that he didn't
suffering
have to.
and her heart. Oh, he didn't have to.
He had a chance he had an out, but he chose to do it anyway. So
yeah.
Any other truths in the film? I think that's mainly
the main ones, the main themes.
Goodness, lots of goodness.
In abundance, and a font of goodness.
Oh gosh, there's James and I and Bryant were having this discussion kind of after the movie, but
I left early.
We sat there for almost an hour, just kind of soaking it in.
There's something so attractive about the life they live, and I don't know, that's not feasible for Riley Swanson to just move to Austria and start a farm commune in the Austrian Alps, but
but it's more than just the
attractiveness,
reject modernity and embrace return.
It's
to
not
farm.
just that,
but it's the community, it's the unity between
the harmony between man
and nature, right? That's I read an excellent essay by Romano Guardini during this past year. The name is Letters from Lake Como, and it's just kind of his discourse on technology and what it's done to us, and lamenting that loss of the integration of the harmony of nature and human kind of innovation. And that, I think that's what stands out to me the most, is something that I desire, is a return to that. We can have technology, it just has to be harmonious. And I don't know how we do that. I would probably not be incredibly happy living such a life. I'm not a farmer. I have no agricultural background. I'm a city kid who studied computer science. I'm about as far away from that as you can get.
Yeah.
But I can't just transplant myself out of my tradition and what I have received and what I know and
how the world in which you were formed. Yeah.
But there's something so beautiful and good about that.
And it was also interesting, when Franz is being led to the guillotine, right? And he's in his last moments outside of the building. He focuses on the nature around him and sees and thanks God for the goodness of nature and the flashbacks and whatever.
He's comforting his fellow death row, inmates.
But it's that connection with nature is also kind of part of his connection with his family, working the farm and stuff. So it's
he's so rooted in where he comes from.
Very rooted.
And
it's farming.
The place just has a weight to it.
Audibly shaking my head.
Audibly shaking our head. I don't know what it is. It's not just old thing good, but it's there's something really cool about a place that has been dwelt in for centuries on end, and all of its
something that has been handed down through the centuries.
Gradual accretions, and it's not just little boxes on a hillside made out of ticky-tacky like we have here in the United States.
Yeah.
There's a sense that the farm was somebody's before them. It was like probably her father's, given he was out of town, right? And it will be their children's, right? Like there's a history and memory to the community that's like very tightly knit. It's very good.
And World War II and the First World War also are sort of the culmination of like the logical conclusion of modernity as it has arisen through the previous 150-ish years or so from the Industrial Revolution. Because when man seeks to recreate the world in his own image through his own means, death and destruction follow in its wake. And so the contrast between, the death and sorrow of the war is brought home to this small farming community. People are wrapped up in the anti-Semitism, blaming the outside world and Jews for their problems. And, the peace of their farming community is constantly threatened, not directly by the war itself, but rather like the ideas being traded about.
And also there's like, they're all like several generations old farmers, right?
Yep.
There's no like immigrants into their town taking their jobs or anything. They're just caught up in the zeitgeist. They're caught up in the rhetoric.
Yeah. And like the family is like ostracized by their neighbors, by their friends, by the people who should be basically their second family.
And who have been as such for their entire lives up until this point.
Like, so the sort of harmony between, with our fellow man and with nature is very much threatened by this massive specter of modernity that is, I suppose modernity gets thrown around in Catholic podcasts a lot, but like sort of
like 1940s modernity.
Well, I suppose modernity,
kind
capital
of the
M,
John Locke onward.
yeah.
Kind
Capital
of
M
this-
modernity is like sort of this idea that with the power of enlightened thinking and science and technology, we can sort of make
master and dominate and control nature and kind of effectively take the place of God.
Yeah, because that's really where a lot of the atheism, like because there's lowercase modern, where it's like recent, and then there's the uppercase modern we're talking about. But
Philosophical period, which we call the modern period.
so, and then there was the subsequent era, which was the postmodern, which was a lot of cynicism, and we're sort of gradually coming out of the postmodern.
Philosophically, we're still in postmodern.
Yeah.
Very much still in the post. We're still figuring out what the heck it means to not be modern.
We're figuring out where to go next.
Right. Because modernity as a philosophical project is very obviously failed. Like you people are just massively miserable, more so than they've ever been. And like clearly this didn't work. This did not give us the kind of the life we were looking for. And now we have to decide where to go.
One thing I was really impressed with this film is the Nazis, as are popularly understood today, are just sort of an archetypal bad guy of our modern like mythos, if
like,
you will.
With a lack of God in like the modern like pop culture, right?
Well, and being like a generation or so removed from the actual conflict, it's sort of
like
has this vapid sense of like, fascist bad, but
Like-
this movie very much avoided that.
Like Hitler in pop culture has become the secular Satan.
It was interesting because the way the film showed him would have been as most people of the time would have witnessed Hitler, just through newsreels.
And they had this like sequence of, they just had this old timey film reel of him like playing with his daughter and like him just kind of living normally.
This kind of home movie type of thing from his perspective.
Yeah, he's not some sort of diabolical, cartoonish bad guy. He was an actual person who lived.
Who made very evil choices. And
Read too much Evola.
Yep.
right.
But like, he was just as
ultimately-
real as anyone else was.
Right.
And this film does a great job of like not falling into, like our hero or the main character is good because rah fascism bad. It was like, no, this man was deeply in love with God and saw the evil of Hitler for what it was, and oppose him on that level instead of some vague political
my least
statements.
favorite bit of dialogue in the movie.
Oh yeah,
when Franz is like, "I'm not condemning him," which I would have agreed with. I'm not saying he's wicked, but you are.
yeah,
That's why you're doing this.
yeah,
I didn't like that.
yeah. It sort of undercut
there's-
his case
Kind
a
of
little bit.
cheapens and kind of it comes close to trivializing everything that has been built up. to
Yeah,
this. It's like
so that's sort of a clumsiness
point
on
is,
the
it's
writer's
not
part.
morally wafty.
Yeah,
The point he tried to make is like, it's not my job to judge, it's
Right.
God's
And
job.
he should have said that and not, I'm not saying he's wicked. Because you are.
which I think that was sort of a clumsy way of trying to say that he's not trying to
Without-
judge him, but
Without, like,
that's really the only weak points of the film.
Yeah.
And really,
the point it was trying to make was not a bad
I am
one,
not
it's just,
the judge.
yeah,
I'm here to say this is what he's doing is wrong and I can't participate in it. I'm
But
not
it
going
just
to
came
condemn
out-
him to hell. That's not my responsibility. That I can't do that. I'm not God.
yeah, it just came out clumsy.
yeah. But
Just
I
like
mean,
the Versus Populi.
yeah, yeah. There was like the freestanding
A
altar,
few historical inaccuracies.
but for the sake of filming on location, like
and
you can look past it.
women not being veiled when
Oh,
they're in
yeah.
churches and a few little details.
Yeah,
But-
and like I understood the point of the scene where she's trying to walk into mass, and the rest of the community is just like staring at her and basically trying to get
and
her
then
out
she
of there.
just leaves.
But it's like, well, you wouldn't just roll up in the middle of mass like that. You would come beforehand like it. But there's like tiny little moments like that. But we're really nitpicking because those are like the very
That's
few.
all you have to criticize.
Yeah,
This movie.
yeah.
Because,
It's,
like,
it's really good. On
I suppose
the whole.
we should probably get into the beauty part of it.
we're rolling right into that.
Yeah,
Like, the
we
This-
kind of talked about the cinematography and the.
and it took a while to get used to.
It
Like,
did.
I sat down to the film and like, how am I supposed to engage with this? And it took like a good third of the movie before I locked into it. It's like, okay, then now it makes sense.
This is like slice of life. You are sort of like in their living room
And it-
watching them go about
And
their
it kind
day.
of took until that sequence with the Hitler home footage where I'm like, oh, that's what this is. It's
Because
that
what is
docu-
evil is a perversion of the good.
Well, not just that, but like
A privation.
Yeah.
but stylistically with the camera movements and camera cuts and the kind of awkward framing, it's like it's trying to emulate that old handheld record like camera home movie. And once that clicked with me, I'm like, okay, now I can follow along with this.
and in my opinion, is an explicit rejection of the modern filmmaking techniques.
Yes.
Like, we are not... this is not all neat and perfect and well...
Theatrical.
Like, right. So it's very much kind of a
Because-
against Top Gun kind of
Yeah.
contra Top Gun.
Yeah.
It sort of makes a statement in amongst the other things it does.
And it does this far better than a lot of other sort of documentary style films that I've seen.
Most postmodern films that are just way too self-referential and like
It's like
this is how you do a postmodern movie well.
because like this, it is somewhat self-referential in how it refuses to be put into a box, but
Not in a way that
Not in a
becomes
way that, like-
obnoxious or takes you out of it.
no, in fact, it draws you into it once you commit to it.
And the soundtrack is quite simplistic also. Like there's
yeah.
sort of the main theme of the film, but then it's also
That,
interspersed
and
with...
that
There's also
kind
just-
of motif is repeated in almost all of the musical numbers. That kind of soaring violin line, and
Because there's like some
meditative
Beethoven in
cello.
there, and there's a bunch of other like
there is
classical
Israel
music.
in Egypt.
Yeah.
A very astute choice.
Yes.
But also just large swaths where there's not a lot of music, just kind of the out of focus audio of the vocals going on in the room, and sometimes it's like they leave background characters speaking in German as it would have been.
Yeah.
And only the people you're supposed to understand and like the moments you're supposed to like really need to communicate.
I understood
speaking.
the artistic choice is just a pet peeve of mine when a film can't
It's like
decide if...
inconsistent about what language it's speaking.
Yep. Yeah.
I am very curious to know how that's done in the German, if there is a German dub.
Because that was like
Most
sort of
Germans
the thing...
speak English, so like they'd probably be watching it. In
That was the
English,
thing in like Isle of Dogs, for example, is very much an artistic choice where like the humans speak Japanese, and that's to portray how the dogs don't understand what the Japanese are saying. But they played the film in Japan, and they were more confused than anything because it was like Japanglish is what it ended up being. So yeah, that's sort of another example of this. But in this case, like I understood the artistic choice and like, you know, what they were trying to convey, you know, but that's just sort of a pet peeve of mine.
But like when language is used intentionally like that, I'm like, what? How would this work in a different language if you translated it? Because if the subtitle is parentheses speaking in Spanish, what's the Spanish dub of that do?
Yep. When you turn on the subtitles to understand understand what some characters saying, indistinct chatter.
Right.
Because even it's not like it was only the Nazis that would break into German. It was like when their fellow villagers would just like start screaming.
It was almost like the more disconnected they were from the rest of the world, the more everyone else spoke. Like early on, a lot of the background characters were speaking English dialogue, I thought I noticed. But like the further into the film we got, the more German background characters were speaking. As though it was like a wedge being driven between the family and the community and everyone else.
Yep.
It was there was a barrier there.
Which, of course, the main characters, when they were participants in that dialogue, were also speaking German.
Right.
So I thought it was very interesting that Terrence Malick used German-speaking actors to play both of the main roles.
Yep. At least the accents
Valerie
were
Pachner
authentic.
is Austrian and August Diehl is German. So they're both native speakers, and Valerie Pachner herself is an Austrian. So
Yeah, there's some people in the film where I look at them and was like, man, like some people I've known growing up are very German facially speaking.
Yep.
Just like I feel like I recognized some of these people almost from like just sort of the appearance. It's like, man, that's where we come from.
Saying all white people look alike.
No.
Just all German people.
Yes.
Salient features.
Right.
No.
Genetic expressions. So yeah, I guess anything else in the beauty category? We've covered a lot of the
One thing
The Alps.
Yes, the Alps are quite
Gosh,
the setting.
The natural beauty of Austria's flooring.
And while they didn't do any like major color grading like you had mentioned earlier, I did notice like there was a distinct rift in the color language of the film when he was in prison. It was like, which is how the prisons look. They're very drab, very
blocky, and
very blocky.
modern, and contrasted with the very organic nature and the green and blue,
the log houses and
gray color palettes of the kind of natural scenes where
And
you
it
had
would
lots
just-
of yellow and white and yuck in the prison.
And you just get random shots of a mountain or a river or a field, just in and amongst all the farm life stuff. It's like very surrounded by that beauty of nature, right? And even when he was in prison and thinking about toward his home, you would get those cuts of home as like the establishing transition shots when they went back to Franny's perspective.
it's interesting, like oftentimes in film, like fascistic regimes and stuff are portrayed with like sort of this kind of like that Apple commercial, like the 1984 Apple commercial of like, you know, very like stark, like Art Deco, like very concrete and like sort of, yeah, brutalist architecture. But when in reality, you know, like if you look at the place where he was taken, like the prison he was in, it was just sort of like a building that was old and dingy and not very like.
It wasn't built with the purpose of being a prison in mind. Even it
Yeah.
like it was converted because that's the space they had to work with.
Yeah,
And a lot of the places the Germans were using, like that military tribunal, was in kind of a Baroque era palace.
like all these things that had been sort of repurposed for, you know, their goals, I guess. But it's sort of I guess a illustration of the sort of the banal side of evil, because like the buildings that, you know, he was executed in are just very nondescript sort of ramshackle sheds. And then when you look at, like when you see pictures of like Auschwitz or the concentration camps or prisons and things at the time, it's just very dingy, slapped together, not much care for it shown. It's just sort of, there's like no glamour because that's kind of how people think of the Nazis, because they very much wanted that image of themselves as like a very glamorous, powerful society. But in reality, the evil is just a very dirty, unseemly.
It's like these were buildings that had a history before them that was painted over.
Yeah.
With just the swastika flags and nondescript white walls with "speaking is forbidden" written on them.
Yeah. And I was just, like, I was just sort of struck by like that scene at the end, when as he's going into his execution. It was just these wooden sheds amidst like a just kind of a pretty, like there's trees and grass and things like that you would never know. Just like the sheer,
just numbered sheds with just doors. Just hanging over. I don't know.
Like, and it's sort of like the hiddenness of his life. Like so he also died just like in a nondescript place that you would
like
never know.
Everyone else died.
If you just passed by it, you wouldn't
prisoners.
know that that's where people were taken to be executed. I guess not sure exactly what I'm getting at, but like it's a very interesting thing when you think on it. I guess it's like sort of. I guess the main point being like evil
not everything
is
was big
quite
and dramatic.
drab and banal because it can only be a privation of good.
Mm-hmm.
So there's obviously no glory, no like stark features to it. It's just a very like it's decay, it's rot, it's all these other things.
Yeah. Which contrasts that with his village at home. It was
full of life
in
every sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's really the only exposure we have to Berlin. We only really see the prison and like a couple scenes where like his wife is making his way to the prison.
Tribunal,
the train station.
A little bit of the downtown, but it's
he
like
does go to the bishop's place.
I think that's in
probably
Austria.
That was in Vienna.
In Vienna, yeah.
Okay.
So it's a little different.
A little different,
But yeah.
Still, it's entirely shown from their perspective. Everything they interact with.
Because even the concentration camps, like people, like the local citizens were like sort of vaguely aware that
They whisper
something was going
rumors.
on, but like it's very sort of hidden, like just out of sight.
Which that's
the
they
grave
were
evil
for the most part. It was like when the American troops showed up there, they were appalled to see what had actually been going down.
Yeah. So, and this, like the suffering of Franz Jägerstätter and his family is like no exception to that. So it's a very, like, I like to talk about historical accuracy of films, but this sort of really captures the spirit of the times in that fashion. So I really appreciated that. It was a film where like, obviously this isn't something you watch for entertainment.
Right.
You watch it to think. And
It's
I didn't
to
have...
feel.
Like I now have a more positive view of the movie after thinking about it for a while after watching, because I remember being after the movie just being like, man, I don't know what I think of this movie. But like, having had the chance to think on it and chew on it, like it's definitely like I've grown to appreciate it a lot more.
This is film as art
Yes.
in like a not pretentious way.
Yes. Very much not pretentious. It's just a very brutally honest.
And
But
it's,
also,
it doesn't like
and maybe
doesn't
brutally,
focus
Not
on
brutally,
brutal,
but like
where
it's just
brutal
raw.
is required.
It's
Right.
unrefined.
Right.
Honesty.
And where that's beautiful, that's tremendously beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And where that is painful, it doesn't hide the painful.
Yeah.
It's just raw and real.
But it also doesn't like dwell on one or the other. It allows it
It's
to
just
happen and pass
receives.
as it happens and passes.
Yeah. Unity, what brings it all together?
A hidden life.
Yeah. I think it's ultimately like
It's a window into a
he
previously
who-
unseen life.
he who seeks to save his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will save it.
That quote that comes on at the end before the credits roll. I can't recite it for you, off the top of my head, but it's just like, so much more changes because of hidden life lived faithfully.
Mm-hmm. It was like
and all
George
of the
Eliot.
great persons of history, George Eliot.
Yeah.
And that's like shooting shots right at Hegel, like, who's very much, he coined the term zeitgeist, like the heroic persons are the ones who change the course of history. And this film comes back and says, no, it's hidden lives.
Yep. Something that obviously like Tolkien recognized in his works sort of hits on that same, and him being a contemporary of this time sort of hits on that idea. It was like George Eliot, I think, was the guy who was quoted right in that.
Correct.
Yeah. Not T.S. Eliot,
Not
different
T.S.
Eliot.
Eliot.
Yeah, different Elliot.
But yeah, I guess do we have any other comments on the film further? Definitely recommend watching.
Go watch
Good.
it. Go watch it.
Just be aware it's a very somber,
It's-
meditative.
And it's about 3 hours.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it really behooves you to be there for all of it, to get into the feel of it, and to be
Right.
able to.
It'll take a bit to adjust to it, but commit to it. It won't disappoint.
Yeah.
Have your affective receptivity turned on,
Yep.
and you will be moved.
Yeah. So I guess that's about all we have to say about that. So thank you for listening.
Where can they find
You
us?
can't
these
find
days?
us on Stitcher anymore. Stitcher
No,
is shutting down.
Sorry,
Oh.
Nathan's
Sorry, Nathan's
mom.
mom.
They'll
Yeah.
have to listen on something else, Mom.
Oh yeah, we're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I think that's pretty much
Are we
it.
doing the YouTube podcast or Google podcast?
Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
Google was wrapped up in
Yeah,
the
Google's
YouTube podcast
gone
thing.
now.
Yeah.
So-
Now there's that YouTube podcast function.
Which we may or may not pursue.
May or
We
may
may
not.
figure that out.
I will see how bored I am this winter. That's really what it's going to boil down
Did you
to.
get bored enough?
Because we were talking about all these grand ideas about having like, oh yeah, we could do video podcasts.
We're gonna do a
so-
multimedia empire.
Just like-
from
and
North
then-
Dakota.
And then I got a new job and a social life, and that just went out the window. So
Wow! Imagine having a life.
yeah. But anyway, yeah, we're on Spotify, we're on Google, or we're on Apple Podcasts. I've sort of uploaded some of our Twilight Princess playthrough. We did streaming for a bit until we stopped.
I don't know where we are in that. We'll
But the
figure it
podcast, that's mainly where you can find us right now. So we'll keep you posted if we come out with other stuff. So thank you for listening. We'll talk to you guys again in the next episode, which
Hopefully, we'll be next week.
yeah, we'll be
out.
next week.
Hopefully, we'll figure out what
It's
that
coming.
is.
Don't you worry. So yeah, share the podcast with your friends. We want to make this the biggest 2 ever. So
The biggest 2. Leave
All
all the
2 of you.
reviews. Don't give the review a 2.
yeah,
does.
please give it a 5.
Please
But
give it a 5. We will love you.
yes. So thank
Not
you
to
for
say we don't
listening.
love you.
Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you in the next episode. Bye.
Okay, love you. Bye.
See ya.